like to introduce our main speaker. Each speaker will share approximately 20 minutes. And this person I've known for quite a while. They used to be in our area and have since moved and found other need to carry on my life in another part of Indiana. But I really enjoy seeing her. When I do see her, I get to see her at different functions like this one from time to time during the year. And every now and then she even pops into our little area and comes up and sees us. But I know that I really enjoy seeing Cheryl and hearing her talk when I do get to hear her talk. And I'm really glad that she chose this workshop to share at, because I have heard her talk and have seen the actions of her spirituality before. And she's a person that I respect and appreciate. So I'll give you Cheryl.
Thanks, Mike.
Hi, family. I'm Cheryl, and I'm an addict. AJ and I were talking earlier this morning about this, and I think for each one of us, spirituality is a process. When I came here, I know a lot of you have heard me talk about this, but it's still the truth. My God was in a box, and it was a religious box. And as time has gone on in my recovery, by working the steps, being open-minded, listening to other people, that's changed. And I'm not saying that religion is wrong, but in order for me to stay clean, I've had to develop and find a spirituality that works for me. And that's ever-changing. You know, it's not a confined doctrine like it used to be. A couple of things come to my mind, and that is, when growing up, I think I was pretty blessed with a family that never really dictated I had to do things a certain way. And I was pretty much given a free choice, even though there was a particular religion that we followed. There was a diversity around me. So when I got here and heard this higher power concept, I was one person who wasn't scared. It's like, I know something has worked in my life over and over throughout the years, my whole life, and certainly saved my life in my using and got me here. And I think if somebody would have handed me something structured and religious when I got here, I wouldn't have stayed. Because every time somebody tried to tell me what to do or how to act, I rebelled. And I was real glad when I heard that, you know, we could choose the God of our understanding. It didn't matter what it was as long as it worked. And I think the most profound thing that happened to me was in my first year in recovery. I was talking religion at a meeting, and somebody loved me enough to come up to me after the meeting and tell me that, you know, if I share a religious message when I'm in a meeting, I'm not carrying the Narcotics Anonymous message. That the message here is open for anybody to develop what they need to. I didn't understand it at first, but I tried to respect it and just do it. And later on, I think as time went on and I began doing step work and opened my mind up enough to look at you people and listen to you, my higher power was speaking through you, and that was good enough. And that's where it started. I wanted to read something out of page 92. By the way, there's a whole bunch in here on spirituality. It's in the index. I see AJ has tons marked. Okay. Some things we must accept, others we can change. The wisdom to know the difference comes with growth in our spiritual program. If we maintain our spiritual condition daily, we find it easier to deal with the pain and confusion. This is the emotional stability that we need so badly. With the help of our higher power, we never have to use again. Any addict is Any clean addict is a miracle. We keep this miracle alive in ongoing recovery with positive attitudes. We receive guidance when we ask for knowledge of God's will for us. Gradually, as we become more God-centered than self-centered, our despair turns to hope. And when I read things like that, that's just an example. That's not religious to me. That's telling me that, the biggest problem I have with my spirituality, the biggest barrier I've ever had is self-centeredness. And, if I can move out of the way and let HP work, then things usually work out pretty well. I see God in you people. When we came here this weekend, I was excited. And I'm not talking addict excited. I'm just talking this spiritual connection. And I'm seeing all these faces that I haven't seen in eons. And I see my God in the middle of that. I don't see religion in that. One of the things that I think has been the most beautiful for me in this program is the love that we do share if we dare to do that. For me, it was really hard to let you love me and know me. And the next hardest thing for me was to know you and love you. And I think through working the steps, and I'm going to say that a lot, probably because that's what I know. When I got clean, we had this basic text. We worked the steps. We went after whatever it took to keep us clean. And I know a loving God guided us through that because we didn't have a whole heck of a lot, much beyond this. And I've heard some people refer to us as a cult, okay? And, I guess you could label that as religion or something, but everything I've read in there, I see nothing religious, and I'm glad. I know there are a lot of people that I've sponsored throughout the years who've had a hard time with breaking that barrier when they have had bad experiences with religion. And our program, as it's designed, written as it is, step by step, gives us that. And I don't have a profound answer on how to get it, other than work the steps. Go to meetings. Open your mind. If you don't have open-mindedness, pray for it. And I struggle with that. We all do. Or we wouldn't need to keep coming back. Hopefully it gets better. And it does. The most profound thing I have to say about my spirituality today is I'm open to whatever feeds the love of my higher power that I have. I'm open to it. And the other thing that I know is when I see something coming between me and my God, I know I need to pay attention to that today too. I don't have to do anything. And, in the past, I think I did confuse religion a little bit with that, thinking that I had to do this. I had to do X, Y, Z because, that's what my God would expect of me, and I don't feel that way today. I know the difference, and we all do. We know when we are truly in connection and when we're not. My struggles begin here and stay there, when I say, okay, I'm going to try to do this my way, and I keep trying to convince myself that my way is going to work, and when I have evidence that there's been barriers and there have been things that have come in between me and my God, no matter what it is, I need to look at that because that's the most important relationship I have in my life today. Everything after that is a bonus. I love Narcotics Anonymous. I love you people, and I love the privilege of being able to have the God of my understanding. And I could sit and share with you today what that is, but it might change tomorrow. I just know that it's good. It's creative, and it's high-spirited, and it's energized, and it doesn't have a sex, and it's wonderful. And in order to maintain that, I just have to keep coming back and paying attention and doing all the maintenance. I've got to keep going to meetings. I've got to keep working the steps. That's how I found my spirituality, was working the steps, the physical act of picking up a pen and writing and sharing something with somebody that was difficult for me to even put on the paper. Because I didn't, initially I think I came here because, my ass was falling off, I was hurt, I was in pain, I did not know how to live a day without using, and I just wanted to change. I had no idea that desire to change would develop into a continued desire to change. I thought at first it was going to be an event, okay, I'm going to get clean, I'm going to find this HP everybody's talking about, and I'm going to get me some steps, I'm going to get me a sponsor, and then I'll have arrived, I want to share, too, that I have erred and fallen short with putting the message of religion out at tables. I've done that. And in the past I have, and that was one of my phases, and I got through it. The other thing that I've done is tried to be God at meetings, and tell you all how you ought to be and how you ought to be talking, and and if I have anything left of that, which I do, I think it's more of a frustration because I want people to get it. And I'm getting a lot better at just letting people be where they're at. A whole lot better. Again, I'm not perfect. I'm still in process and grateful to be here. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Cheryl. I got this shirt on. I got to hug everybody today. I'm an ad called AJ. And, there was a lot of things scattered that I wanted to get real cohesive, so I had to write some things down. That's the way my mind works. And I like to go to the literature, and I thought, this was an awesome topic because it has run so many people out the door. When we've done public information for a parole department, when they told us that that was one of the biggest reports they had when they pointed people to 12-step fellowships, when they came back, the word God. They wanted to justify that they didn't have to be there because that word offended them. And I know that the latitude that we get here in a spiritual program, it makes it pretty free, the God of your understanding, that, for me personally today, the only thing I'd be running from would be myself. It wouldn't be God, by using that as an excuse. The God of my understanding, higher power, capital P, power, whatever, him, he, whatever the book wants to call it, it's what it is to me. The underlying spirit that I think we're all in tune with. However, we were talking about that last night, however we recognize that. One of the things that I looked through some of the traditions, because, I thought that on a topic like spiritual, not religious, probably what I should do is just go right where I thought. I was looking at the word religion here in the dictionary, and then, I'm looking at the other page, just glancing around, there's relationships, and they got a workshop going on right now on relationships, and I thought, oh yeah, that's usually packed. But religion, a belief in a divine or superhuman power or principle, usually thought of as the creator of all things, the manifestation of such a belief in worship, ritual conduct, etc., any system of religious faith or practice. Religious, feeling and manifesting religion, devout, pious, of or pertaining to religion. And I work my program religiously because here it says faithful and strict in performance,
conscientious, a religious loyalty. And, I can use that word here, that I try to religiously work on AJ to the best of my ability. So it's not a bad word. And then the other one, obviously, would be spiritual. It's not so much a comparison of the two, but, spirit, the animating principle of life and energy in man and animals, the part of a human being characterized by intelligence, emulation, emotion, will, etc., the mind. And then going on to spiritual, of or pertaining to spirit, of or consisting of spirit, of pertaining to or affecting the highest or purest moral or intellectual qualities of man, not earthly or sensual. Let's see. Anything pertaining to spirit, sacred matters, going into more what the religious aspect of it is. But I thought about what it meant to me, somebody that always had a belief in God, even in my darkest moments in using. And, in the beginning of my using, when it was real mild drugs that were in tune with nature kind of drugs, how I looked at this world, what made it go together, at that early quest age that I was, God was a part of that. And then I looked at the end of my addiction, my using rather, and it was street drugs that the word God or what makes the world go around did not come up at the tables anymore. It was getting and finding ways and means to get more. That somewhere that talk of what that spirit was didn't exist anymore at a dope table. And I knew I was, different than I used to be. It told me a lot right there. So I've always had that pull, that desire to, that wonder, that awe, that what's it all about? And I think that we beat ourselves up over that, running from it sometimes in our active addiction, because, I'm not probably worthy of even figuring it out. What's God want to do with me anyway? And, whatever it was. And well, in fact, in the end, mine was because I was getting so political, so looking at the world and the world's problems, that I got so caught up was, screw it, the world's screwed up, so let's get high. And that was the losing my spirit that I used to have, that I always had, and I still had. I had a ray, and this program revived that. And then I see that I'm walking around with a lot of other people, and this fellowship has taught me that my spirit can communicate with another spirit here. And I really believe that there is one spirit, my belief. I was telling my sponsor today that probably whatever I would talk about here today, however I was led to share, that I was going to bleed. I was going to let some of my personal dogma probably sneak out with trying to be as politically correct on a topic like this as I could be. I told them how I had almost not was offended, but when somebody at a convention shared that they were 5 years it took them to find what the God of their understanding was. And now that I found it, I'm not going to tell you, and wow, somebody else is struggling, at least let them borrow it until they can find their own, I thought, And, it wasn't like I got it and you're not going to get it. That's not what the spirit of this program taught me, For starters, I guess I've already started, but I mean, one of the traditions I looked at was the 11th, where it said, no individual inside or outside the fellowship represents NA. And then I looked at that from a religious aspect. There are people that are the head honchos, the gurus, the people that are looked up to, the people that are pedestaled in religion. That can let people down. And we talk about that a lot around here, whether it's a sponsor or somebody that we were talking about last night, how people in the basic text, their stories and things, and I can't put anybody on that. There are no leaders, we're only trusted servants here. And the most powerful weapon is another recovering addict. That's basic grassroots, how the message is shared. And I got a lot of good since I've been here already. There we go. We are simply addicts of equal status, freely helping one another. It's tradition out of tradition 8. In tradition 7, we all have to pull together, and in pulling together, we learn that we are part of something greater than ourselves. And tradition 1 says our survival is directly related to the survival of the group and the fellowship. And also, this program can do for us what we could not do for ourselves. One of the things that I saw, when I compared the two in my thinking, religion and what just being a spiritual human, without all the frill and the trappings of ritual, dogma, something that I'm told I need. And then I read this, also in the first tradition, it says, we are accepted and loved for who we are, not in spite of who we are. We have empathy here. We don't have sympathy. We don't feel sorry for people. We have, I'm glad that cliche didn't come up, spirituality is for people who have been to hell and, all that old line. But, I do believe we have lived our personal hells. We have experienced what brought us here. We all have our story, and I believe that's the story that should keep me here, the story that brought me here. But no one can revoke our membership or make us do anything. I can't get excommunicated here, No one can make us do anything that we do not choose to do. We follow this way of life by example rather than direction. I think there's some direction, there's some suggestions. And when Cheryl saw my basic text, she says, oh, somebody else has got the musts underlined, and I know a lot of people that do. Found the 48 musts in the first part of the basic text. And I also had it when somebody told me the word God was in there 93 times, I had to find the word God 93 times. It's a God-given program. I know I've got that one written down here. It says so in our basic text, for people like us. When I hear that reading at every meeting, many of us tried a lot of other things, and they proved insufficient for us. And the only way God could speak to our spirit was through a bunch of one-time losers. Here we are, and that's the way it works, and I don't have to understand it for it to work. It works. I had to believe and trust in other people's evidence when I came here. I had to see the smiles. I had to see the laughing. I had to see the recovery was okay. Change was okay. That's what I had to understand that recovery. I talked about that earlier today was at another meeting was, what am I recovering from? And basically this topic even told me pretty much I was running from the things that I tried to place blame on, that I was not part of, I was apart from. And this is probably as close to, that one spirit, that spirit, pervading spirit that can be felt at meetings, it says in our literature, that empathy, that been there, done that feeling, that I'm not alone, never alone, N.A., that speaks a lot to me. We learn, we share experience, strength, and hope instead of preaching and judging, and that to me, religion was in there when I saw preaching and judging. And there's a lot, and like I said, when I said I was going to bleed today about my own personal dogma, it's probably because I was brought up in what I would stereotype and say a lot of people were brought up under in this country, and whichever sect that was. And I don't reject it 100%. However, I didn't want it their way, and I know there were a lot of not suggestions. There were a lot of you got to do my way or the highway kind of thinking, and everybody else. It made me put blinders on. Religion made me put blinders on to other people. This program opened me up to other people, that I could respect your belief in your God here, and sometimes that is my struggle when I hear something way out there, that's not God to me, but it's the God of your understanding, then it's okay. If it's working, you're staying clean, and you've got evidence, and you're lining up with spiritual principles here, because that's what the program is, a set of principles written so simply we can follow in our daily lives. It's not profound, deep, heavy. I've got to go to classes. And you ever hear that when somebody says, well, where are those NA classes at? I've heard that before. Somebody thinks they're classes. They're not meetings, they're classes. But, I don't have to study any history of NA for it to work. I don't have to worship Jimmy K. I don't have to worship any figurehead, Godhead of this program. There are no gurus. There's a lot of people that gave a lot. And, we were talking about those predecessors. And when the traditions were formulated, and this fellowship did not formulate traditions, so I respect all previous predecessors, wherever these traditions came from and these steps. And I like that the way God worked, that we could fine-tune them to fit people like us, to speak to people like us. It's the last road on the block, or last house on the road on the block. And we learn new ways, and out of what can we do? We learn new ways to live. We are no longer limited to our old ideas. You know, and I thought about that at a meeting early on, and we hear it all the time when they tell a newcomer that old cliche that, well, you only got to change one thing, everything. You know, and that told me I was locked and loaded on a lot of sick ideas, the way I thought the world was, you know, that kept me, like I said, going back out. Screw it, screwed up anyway, let's get high. And I know that, you know, today I can have a spiritual experience of living the steps. You know, I wrote that down too. You know, because our program is a way of life. We learn the value of spiritual principles. When we came here, our spirit was broken. The capacity to feel human was lost. You know, and all I've heard about here today, so far this weekend, gratitude and love. It's come up so many times. You know, I can feel human again. You know, and I can cry. I can hug another man. I can hug people here and know that just like me, when I told the story, and I won't go long into it, where I saw somebody close to by where I work, and they had a plate on their car. It said God NA12. I mean, it was the regular state license plate, and they had a custom plate like that. And I finally met that person, and it was just such a bond we had. In fact, when I went there and the guy wasn't there, I didn't know if it was a guy or a girl, but I went and asked. I says, whose car is this out here? And they said, do you know that person? I says, I think so. You know, and never met him yet. And then when we met, we had that connection right away. That was our spirits. You know, it was really good. It was great. And I'm going to meet that person, or not meet, I'm going to see him again at another function. You know, I think about, we shared about some of these things, you know, like right here, an incurable disease, right in the beginning of the book, in the preface, as we were talking about earlier, the preface. An incurable disease of body, mind, and spirit. We were in the grip of a hopeless dilemma, the solution of which is spiritual in nature. Therefore, this book will deal with spiritual matters. We are not a religious organization. Our program is a set of principles through which we are recovering from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. The program gives us a relationship with a power greater than ourselves, corrects defects, and leads us to help others. Where there has been wrong, the program teaches us the spirit of forgiveness. You know, and a spiritual part of our disease is total self-centeredness. We can find meaning and purpose in our life. We simply realize there is a force for spiritual growth that can help us become more tolerant, patient, and useful in helping others. And the only way I can reject this, today I believe that, you know, what I don't have a choice in is how I work my program sometimes. I look at the cause and effect when I think about what the attributes of my God, of my understanding are, what the truth is, which if I line up with these spiritual principles, and there's more than they're just in the book. You know, the spiritual principle of awareness, I was telling my sponsor, just being able to do the things that I was not free to do in the past. You know, one of them was a simple thing, to pull over one of my favorite restaurants, who has the greatest Mexican food. They probably don't have it that good in Mexico. You know, and to have the freedom to go in there and just plop down dinner and a tip $10 on myself on my way to work. And in my using days, I was aware of the fact that I couldn't do that. That was a dime bag. You know, I don't need to eat anyway. Hell with it. Let's keep going. You know, that was the thinking. I had the freedom today to make that choice, and it looks like I made quite a few of them. I know, but you know, that's another story. That's, you know, but this program can work for that too. They told me. There's a lot of things I'd like to cover. I know earlier we had a lot of good response from other people sharing, and you know, and like I said, it's just couple different perspectives up here, and I'm going to give everybody else a chance. But I think empathy that I can feel with people that have been there, and the unity rather than uniformity, because religion makes me try to you know, mold myself into something that I'm really not. Here I can be who my true nature comes out here. You know, my exact nature I have to look at. And then the true nature, I think that what the God of my understanding had in store for me can develop and grow in this fellowship. You know, where I might be stifled elsewhere. You know, I have tried elsewhere, and I ended up here, and I'm glad to be here, and thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you both. Let's see, I thought there was something else I was supposed to read here. Oh, okay. Before we open the floor for sharing, I need to remind everyone that you're being taped. If you wish not to be taped, please let me know. For that, the tape can be turned off. So if you want to share and you don't want to be taped, just let me know. We can shut the tape off. I'd like to make a comment first before I open it up. Like I said, I've known both of these people for a little while, and glad to hear them. You know, I'm kind of like AJ. You know, a lot of the things that he was talking about when I first came into the program. You know, I was raised in the only true religion, and I'm sure you guys probably were in that too, but it was probably a different one. And that basically, you know, the way that we followed was the right way, and everybody else was wrong, even though it was the same religion. You know, they basically did have the exact same higher power. They were wrong, and it's like I really had a hard time understanding that as I got older. You know, how can we worship the exact same God and be different? You know, I mean, we even use the same book, and it's different. You know, it's wrong. I just really couldn't understand that, so I kind of just moved away from it altogether. And since I became back involved with Narcotics Anonymous and recovery, you know, I become reacquainted with spirituality, and it is different today for me. It's not. Well, I kind of like what you read in the definition of religious, because I do practice a lot of things religiously, but I don't have that much dogma. Certain specific rules that this is the way that it has to be. I just do things in a religious manner. But, you know, I also did a lot of investigation, you know, looking into things and a lot of reading and studying. And one thing that I noticed was that there was a connection and common principles involved in all of it, and not just, you know, the mainstream American religion, but worldwide religion. You know, and I saw that even in the remotest parts of the world that were isolated for thousands of years, they had a belief in some type of a spiritual being. You know, so I knew that there had to be something, and that the idea that it was all or nothing wasn't working either, you know, because before I believed it had to be in one way, and then I believed, well, there's nothing. So, you know, I came to believe that there really has to be some type of a spiritual thing there. And I have developed my own personal beliefs, you know, and I'm grateful today that I'm in a program, a fellowship that's open-minded enough to where I can have mine and you can have yours, and we're both right. You know, there can be 100 different belief systems, and they're all right. You know, there's no one true belief, and I'm really grateful for that, because one thing that I learned also in that studying is that there's a lot more commonality and diversity than there is diversity. You know, even though they're extremely diverse cultures and stuff, there's common things when it comes to spiritual belief. You know, there's common principles, and they're always right. But with saying that, I'll open up to anyone who likes to share. Just raise your hand and come on up.
Thanks, Mike.
You got it.
Could be. Hi everybody, I'm Megan. I'm a recovering addict. The thing I find amazing is how I know this fellowship and these 12 steps and the whole program is not religious, is I can look at the worldwide, where we hold meetings worldwide, you know, how many countries we're in. And I know in some countries people believe in Buddha, Allah, you know, the Quran, whatever. They've got meetings worldwide, and if it was a religious program, we would all have to go to the same church. I've never seen any of you guys at the church that I was going to, but yet you're getting the program too. That shows me it is a spiritual program. And my little dogma is probably going to come out a little bit too, but I do believe that there is one true source. We just give it different names. You know, we all came from somewhere, and when we die, we're all going back to somewhere. We just name it different things sometimes, you know. Religions teach us what to call it. We just know what it feels like. And I think that's a very huge blessing in my life, because as I was growing up, religions scared me. You know, people could control me religiously, and I didn't like that, so I fell away from the church and all that. And when I got clean, I tried doing the church thing again. Again, it was control through religion. I was uncomfortable with that. But I will keep trying a religion, because some of the beliefs that I have found have helped me in my recovery. But I just haven't found the box that it fits in yet, so I guess it doesn't. I'm just really grateful. I'm very thankful for our speakers. You guys did a great job, and I really am glad I got to hear you share. That's all I got. Thanks.
Hi, family. I'm a grateful recovering addict called Derek. I would like to express my gratitude to AJ and Cheryl for allowing me to be a part of their life and for allowing them to be a part of mine. Since the beginning of recorded history, there have been wars that have been fought in the name of God and in the name of religion, you know, for 5,000-6,000 years. And that I know of, Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous have never gone to war. I don't think that I could have stayed here if that was the case. You know, spirituality to me is that connection that I have with that which I cannot see and hear, but I can feel it. You know, and it's of God. And this program, these 12 steps, I believe, and I'm convinced, are given to us from God. Religions, to the best of my study, all seem to me to be created by men so that they can control other men or dominate other men or whatever it is, you know, this power thing that human beings have a tendency to chase after in their lives. In Narcotics Anonymous, that doesn't seem to be the case, although there are some people with egos who maybe are still struggling with their spirituality. I know with AJ, his spiritual beliefs and my spiritual beliefs, from a dogmatic point of view, are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet we love each other like brothers, you know. And I believe that we are a kindred family, you know. And it's because of what these 12 steps teach us. It's because of what has been given to us by this great invisible force that lives in all things, that causes us to be good and to do good. You know, not to say that religions can't do that. I don't believe that you can have religion truly without spirituality. But it's very difficult to have spirituality with religion, because it's too confined. And I really love it when Cheryl talks about keeping God in a box and how confining religion is. You know, my spiritual program is much, much bigger than any religion I've ever looked at. Because God is infinite. He's everywhere. You know, and that's where my program, I hope, will take me, is everywhere I want to go. You know, and I believe that it will. Like Meg was talking, we came from someplace and we're going to go someplace. And I'm going to find out what that is. And I haven't read about a religion yet that has explained what that is, other than the use of the word heaven. You know, this is heaven to me, right here in this fellowship. Thanks.
Thanks, Derek.
Hi, I'm an addict named Mike. I'm from the Detroit area. I was listening to people talk about spirituality, and I just want to make a comment that spirituality in many ways is similar to the concept of health. Now, we all agree everybody has health. true, some people have poor health, and some people have good health, and some people just a similar way have poor spirituality. And these may be people that are a little bit self-centered, cynical, negative, pessimistic, angry, resentful, greedy. And the flow of recovery has become a little bit less self-centered and try to become a little bit more God-centered. And there's a guy that I sponsor that he questions the spirituality concept. And it's like it's seemingly tie-ins with religion, and he's thinking that something's eluding him. And the reality is that this individual, along with the fellowship as a whole, seem to be becoming more and more God-centered, and that's seen in people becoming more caring and giving and understanding and trusting, and we let down the barriers, we let down the walls, we let people into our lives, we positively influence other people's recovery, and that's spirituality in progress. So sometimes it's like we try to be, rocket scientists trying to analyze and get, therapeutic about what spirituality is, and all around it's happening, It's happening all around. And, I came into the fellowship a few years ago, and one of the first things that I was aware of is that there seemed to be a lot of miracles happening. Everywhere I looked, I'd sit down at tables, I'd listen to people talk, and I'd just be convinced that this is a miracle from where they were to where they are today. And one day it just occurred to me, with all these miracles, perhaps there's a miracle maker. And it was a little awakening for me. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin and I'm an addict. Let's see. From spiritual, when I first came into the program, the idea of God scared me because of the religious implications. The first time around, and by the time I came back the second time, I had been through treatment enough, and my therapist was a recovering addict in NA and had 15 years, and was always talking about it not being a religious program but a spiritual program. So when I came back, I didn't have any illusions about religion that I did the first time. And by the time I had come back, I had pretty much established part of my spiritual beliefs today. One thing that I've noticed is a lot of people like to argue. Religion is one of those topics you don't bring up at parties, because with that in politics, you too many conflicting views. But my view is this. We all start in the same place. We all get to the same place in the end. Just whichever path we go is different. Everybody has their own path to follow. And a lot of people like to call their higher power God. Mine is the goddess. And then all these other cutesy little names. But right now I need right now at this point I've got to improve my contact with my higher power more than I do. But her and her helpers help me out quite a bit. I've learned a lot. I need to get out of the searching stage and get into the normal contact more. But I have more freedom with my spiritual beliefs as a spirituality concept than as a religion. And one cool thing about my spiritual beliefs, nobody's going to hell because there is none. And that's all. Thanks.
I'm an addict called Don. And a lot of people have shared beliefs that are parallel to mine, and I'm grateful for that. But I felt the need to share about some things, like when I came here, I was ungodly. Some of us are ungodly people when we first hit these doors. And for me, I experienced spirituality long before I experienced God. And I wanted to share about some of those things because those were real important to me in the beginning. like when I was dogging somebody out in an attic, said, Don, that's not very spiritual. I didn't have a clue what spirituality was, but I had one about it, what it wasn't. And I've had lots of spiritual advisors since I've been here. And the first time I used to empty ashtrays, and I don't go to many meetings where there's a lot of ashtrays anymore. But people in the beginning asked me to empty ashtrays, and I got insulted. I didn't feel like I was anybody's flunky. But after I started emptying ashtrays, I've noticed that I had a feeling about myself after I emptied the ashtray. And then a couple years later, I read in NAA about spiritual pennies being hidden under ashtrays. And that if I wanted to increase my spirituality, I needed to be moving some ashtrays and collecting some spiritual pennies. And I took that in another direction, that when I did things I didn't have to do, and one of my spiritual advisors said, because I used to be kind of honest, I don't get this. We're doing step work, I don't get this. And he said, go out, do something good for somebody, don't tell nobody about it, and don't let that person know about it, and there'll be a blessing in it. And I'm like, you're drunk, man. I don't do nothing for nothing, and if I do it, I'm damn sure going to tell somebody about it, but I tried it, and there was another feeling, and I can still do. To me, this is what I feel like I need to talk about spirituality, because to me, spirit is a spirit. It's that spirit that when we're all in disagreement about something and we feel like ripping each other's head off and shitting down their throat, the spirit moves us to surrender and hug. To me, that's spirituality. And I've been in those situations in literature workshops and service commitments where we decide that there's only one way and it's mine. And that's when the spirit moves. And I've been in meetings where the format used to say, this meeting people share as the spirit moves them. I've sat in meetings and heard people say things and asked 6 people, did you hear what that person said? 2 of them heard the same thing I did. The spirit moved and we got the message that we were supposed to get. Everybody didn't hear the same thing. To me, that's spirituality. It has nothing to do with God. And my struggle when I first came here with the steps was that I was calling people who had been clean 20 years and trying to convince them the steps don't work because they weren't working for me. And some addicts helped me, the people I consider spiritual advisors, by letting me know that I really only worked the first 4 and that the God of my understanding works the rest. And I've been there to find out who wrote them. It didn't help me any. It probably worked for them, but it didn't for me. And today, I don't have to be religious to be spiritual. I don't even have to believe in God to be spiritual. I do have a God of my understanding, and I'm real okay with my God. But it doesn't have to be yours. And it doesn't have to do with me being spiritual. Today, being spiritual is going somewhere and feeling. I'll tell you, the most spiritual moment I ever had was there was an addict I hated their guts. They used to take a bell like you see in a motel to a meeting with them. And if you shared too much, they'd start ringing the bell. And if they didn't like how much money was in the basket, they'd pass it again until they got how much money they wanted. And I hated them. I was like, man, I wish they'd go back out. And one day, we were in the same meeting at the same time. I generally avoided this addict. But we wound up in the same room at the same time. And I seen that look in their eye, and I seen that quiver in their cheek, and I knew they were in pain. And then the tears started to fall, and I knew what they were feeling. And that was the empathy, because at that moment I loved them, and I didn't care about the bell and the basket. All I cared about was they were hurting, and I knew how that felt because I'd hurt plenty. And I knew they needed a meeting, and I needed a meeting, and that was the spirit. And that was probably one of the most spiritual experiences I've had since I've been coming around. So today, Don don't try to complicate stuff a whole lot. Today I believe some real basic things. If I do real basic things, like here's a big one. If I don't put anything into my body, I won't get high. Now I used to be real confused about that. I thought getting high had to do with people, places, and things. I didn't know that if I just refrained from picking something up, that I'd stay clean. So today, through working the steps, I have an understanding of a God that suits me and works for me, and I don't have to teach you how to believe that way. I don't have to drag you down the road somewhere. And the steps work for me today because, get this, I was sitting in a penitentiary cell, and I decided, after years of talking shit, it's maybe time to get honest with me and with my higher power. And so the steps started working for me. And the God of my understanding was developed. But what I'm sharing here is that if you believe spirituality and God is the same thing, that's okay. I don't share that belief. I believe I got spirituality long before I got God. I believe that that God today is a spirit, and it moves through this rooms when it's needed the most, and that sometimes when the reason isn't in alignment with spiritual principles, we seem to be in a mess and at each other's throat. And when it is in spiritual alignment, we reach out to each other. To me, that's spirituality. Spirituality is when I call somebody at 3:30 in the morning and I can't talk to them because I'm crying, and they keep saying it's okay. They haven't got a clue what I'm talking about because I ain't talking, but they keep saying it's okay, Don. It's okay. It's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. And to me, that's spiritual, because when I first came here and a guy hugged me, I thought he was a fag, and I wasn't down for that. And today I can share with you that the very thing that kept me coming back through all my confusion, disillusion, and insanity was I remembered hugs. I remembered that every time someone dealt with me in a loving fashion, I grew a little bit, and that it was the love that I wanted in the first place, not a key tag, not recognition, not a pat on the back. I wanted love, and I recognized it but didn't recognize it, and the motivation has kept working for me. It doesn't matter how mad I get at you all, and I do get mad at you, okay? I do, because you don't live up to my expectations. I keep coming back because it's those times, it's those hugs, even the fuck you hugs. I'm even okay with them, because you know what? Today I have hope that next time you hug me, you won't give me a fuck you hug. That it'll be one of them warm, fuzzy ones. So that's spiritual to me. A hug can be real spiritual. So I just needed to share that because, I spend a lot of time now having a lot of gratitude for a lot of people who held my hand and tried to help me. And it took years for the lessons to sink in, about the ashtrays, about being able to open a meeting without somebody telling me to, or without being elected to, or without being coerced into, like, Don, that's your responsibility, damn it. But actually, the greatest feeling in service I ever had was somebody quit. And I used to go and open that meeting and put out the literature and make the coffee, and nobody knew who did it because it was done when everybody got there. And I never said nothing, and it felt so good. It was so different than when I was at Region trying to kick butt for the newcomer, or when I was at Area trying to change everybody for the newcomer. And actually going and opening that meeting so that the door was open, the coffee was made, the literature was there, and guess who showed up? The newcomer. So that was the greatest thing, and that was my greatest service experience. And today I don't have any service commitments that aren't spiritual in nature, because today I know that ego is my greatest enemy, and that my greatest weakness with my disease is in direct relation with my ego. So I can be spiritual and not be a guru. I can be spiritual and not be the chairman of the area. I can be spiritual and not even be at a meeting. I can open a door for a complete stranger. It doesn't take any effort. And when they say thank you, there was a time I was too cool to open the door for anybody. But spiritual in nature. And so I need to share that, because it's real important to me, and I feel like it's real important to other people like me who were ungodly, who abhorred the words God when they came in these rooms, who abhorred even the concept of a higher power. The only time that I got next to that was when it said if you wanted this table moved on, you couldn't move it by yourself, and you asked another addict to help you, and you still couldn't, you got another addict, and you three of you moved this table, that's a power greater than you, right? Okay, then leave it there. And it worked for me that way, But spiritual in nature it's a spirit of love for me. And it's a spirit of unconditional love, because a lot of times I do things and don't have a clue who it's for, and never have a clue how far it's going to reach. And today, when I'm being responsible, I keep that in mind, how far it's going to reach. Who's it going to affect? Am I going to sit here and rationalize my bullshit and have somebody in Wisconsin saying, I can rationalize my bullshit, he did? No, that's not responsible. That's just addiction. Spirituality to me has nothing to do with religion. I never fit there. I always wanted to, but I never felt comfortable. I never felt no matter what I did, I would be a part of. And guess what? I've been to NA meetings all over the Midwest, a lot of parts of the United States, and some other countries. And guess what? I have never went into a meeting, I don't care what kind of addicts were there, where I didn't feel like I was a part of. I felt uncomfortable because I didn't know nobody, but I didn't feel like I didn't belong or I didn't fit. And when somebody talks about their God, cool. I let them talk. When somebody talks about spirituality, if I hear something that I can get something out of that, I'm down for it, because I want that. I want that feeling of being worth something more than a con man and a dirt bag. And to me, that's what spirituality does for me. It takes away that dirt bag thing and that scumbag. And people taught me that. I didn't read it in a book. I didn't sure as hell think of it myself. And I resisted it with every ounce of energy I had when the suggestions were made. And today, I don't have to do that. And I feel real grateful that there was a God who decided that there's some really sad people out there who need a place to go and find some love. And in 1953, Narcotics Anonymous was formed. And today I can love you all a little bit. But each day it's a little bit more. And it's a little bit more honest than at first, when all I wanted was your money and your body. That's all I got to share. Thanks for letting me.
Hi, I'm Vicki and I'm an addict. I'm a little nervous about being up here. I don't know why. In a meeting I can talk. It's just everybody's facing this direction. But, so I wasn't going to get up, but I was listening to everybody talk, and I just kind of wanted to celebrate. I was thinking about the growth from the religious way I was brought up to having a more spiritual way of life now. I was brought up in a family like probably a lot of us were brought up in, really dysfunctional, really angry, incredibly violent, no respect for each other, but they went to church every Sunday. And Sundays were like the bloodiest day of the week, but they went to church. It seems like what that was about was they want to go to heaven when they die. And this is what you do. You follow the set of patterns and these rules, and you can go to heaven when you die. And it's like, but they were so unhappy, and they still are now, I believe that everything is spiritual, so I can understand, being spiritual before you know God. I remember being in a treatment program and a counselor talking about how when you do drugs you lose your spirituality. Well, in my opinion, drugs are very spiritual. It's bad spirituality. It's a bad choice. Everything is spiritual. I believe we're spiritual beings first. But I remember coming into meetings, and I was basically a big isolationist. And I didn't trust anybody. Can any of you relate? And I learned through going to meetings that we all have this common bond, that people are people, whatever race, whatever gender, whatever religion you are. Pain hurts. Joy is good. And it's like this family thing. But when you guys started talking about a God of your understanding, it was really, really hard to get past that. It was like, well, God is already formed, and this is what I've been taught God is, so what do you mean, a God of my understanding? I can't change God. But somehow I started reaching out on my own to get to know God. It was like, at times I almost felt like this was bad, you know? But I needed to, and God was very open. So to me, religion is kind of like, if it works for you, cool, then go with it. And I try not to harp on anybody about the religion because I think maybe it'll lead them on to something else, you know. But spirituality to me is a one-on-one relationship with my God. It's getting to know God in a personal way. My best moments spiritually are like, I go up to the dunes and something magic happens to me. I don't understand it. It's just God created it that way. I step in the sand and it's just like this date with God. It's this romantic moment with God. And you know, I never heard of that in any religion. You know, I listen to the water, listen to the waves, and it's like, I was at a baby shower one time and they had this toy they passed around and it had a little motor in it that sounded like the mother's heartbeat. And I go to the beach and that's what that reminds me of, the waves. It's like, it was like being in God's womb. It's just, that's my favorite spirituality. That's a God of my understanding. A God who's always there for me, a God who, when I go to the dunes and I'm feeling like shit, I'm feeling worthless and all this old religion is creeping back in, slowly it comes back to me that, oh yeah, this is what you are. You're the one that takes the tattered people in. You're the one that takes the broken people in. I don't have to follow the set of rules and be a certain thing and live a certain way to get to know you. You already love me. I can't help it. I can't fight it. And man, I don't want to. But I don't know if this made any sense, but I'm just so happy that I don't feel like I'll never be good enough anymore, you know? I still love going to church. If I find the right church where the praise and worship is the same, it's like, to me, in a way, it's like a meeting. I go to meetings to get support, you know, in this phase of my life. And in church, it's wonderful when everyone's there for the same reason, when they're there to worship God, you know, not because they have to show their neighbor that they go to church on Sundays. But I really appreciate the growth, the things that I've learned about a God of my understanding through this program. Thank you.
I'm Ray Amnetic. You know, I'm like one of these dictionary definition type guys when I was working steps, and I remember coming across the word spirituality, and I didn't have a definition for it that I could really latch on to. So my household had a computer at that time, so I went upstairs, and those of you that have computers and are online, you know that they have these search engine things, they call them, and they put a little block there, and you can type in any word you want and hit enter, and it'll all search the information on the web and try and match it up for you. So I typed in spirituality, and then it pops up. Of course, it says we have 22,752 matches to this. So I go, oh my. So I go to the very first one, and it said, we all possess the same amount of spirituality, only some are more awake than others. And that's all. That's as far as I went with checking that out. And because I believe that. And when we listened to our 12 step, we said, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And so, you know, I think that I look at meeting, I can see who's more awake than others. You know, so something I can judge on. I think that. You know, I was thinking when AJ was talking earlier that when I was just a teenager, I was attracted to people that had a purpose, you know, and that the people that had some intelligence, and my ears would perk up, and I would say, you know, that sounds. Something like that, something I'm thinking about. You know, that sounds like a good idea. And this is like a raising of consciousness. And, you know, I was a teenager back in the 60s, and I was into music, and the wave back then was, you know, all you need is love and slogans like, what if they put on a war and nobody came? And, and these were spiritual awakenings. These were conscious awakenings. And you just think of something like that. What if they did that and nobody showed? That's, it's baffling, but it could be a reality. And I think about, when you think about this consciousness raising, what happens when you get a bunch of people that are thinking the same thing, and how powerful it gets, just like we are here today at this. And then I think about this religious aspect, and I have my youngest son, and he's creeping up on 3 years in another fellowship. And in his first year, he was really in a dilemma, because there was a lot of people at his meetings that were grabbing him and taking him to church. And he would come to me and just be distraught, going, "Oh my God, I went there to their church and they told me to come, and I don't know, I'm confused, And so I told him that the best advice that I could give you, I said, is, well, first sit down here at home and find your God in you. And then if he happens to live in one of these churches, then fine. Don't be looking for him in a building first." And so I know I helped him a little bit on that. And so the whole, I was here in this convention a few years ago, and this workshop was entitled Religion versus Spirituality. And they changed that. Now it's not, I guess it's not a fight anymore. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to come to a workshop like this, and I'm glad to hear different ideas and to find out that, when I came in here, and it's the same as like what AJ said, I had pursued drugs towards spirituality, and for a long time I thought I was getting closer to God, by doing drugs, and somewhere down the line it wasn't about that anymore, And so now I had to, I'm glad that I tripped into here, and it's no longer, ways and means of getting more. It's, now I'm not ingesting any drugs in my body no more, and I'm back on the path that I was on 30, 40 years ago or whatever. So thanks a lot for letting me share. I pass.
Thanks, Ray.
Okay, well, it's just 4:45, and so we're out of time. I appreciate Cheryl and AJ again, and I appreciate all the comments that I've heard since then. And so how do we end this thing? Okay, we end it with could you everyone please help me in with a group hug and a serenity prayer.
Thanks for sharing, Mike.
Do it outside?